After almost 6 months, Daniel Martell doesn't believe Lilly and Jack Sullivan are in the woods near their home in Lansdowne Station.
Everything's been searched at this point, so I think everyone's just looking to, what's the alternate, what could happen to the kids other than being...
Daniel Martell made a statement that forces a hard, uncomfortable pivot in this investigation. He did not offer a guess. He stated a conclusion grounded in repeated observation and professional search results. I don't believe the kids in the woods. They didn't wander in there. That line is simple, but its consequences are enormous. What follows is a clear, focused rundown of why he reached that conclusion, what searchers did and did not find, and what investigators must do next. This claim did not arrive from idle talk or unexamined emotion. It followed days of watching a massive, coordinated search, helicopters sweeping the canopy with thermal cameras, drones flying systematic grids, ground teams forming tight shoulder-to-shoulder lines, and canine units working ravines and creek beds where scent and traces tend to hold. The operation used laser mapping, GPS overlays, repeated resweeps of sectors, and teams trained specifically to find the tiny, human traces children leave behind. That level of effort matters because it turns what is absent in the field into meaningful information. When experienced searchers and modern technology combine and still return no evidence, that void becomes evidence itself. Search experts expect to find microtraces, a sock snagged on a thorn, a shoe print in soft mud, a broken twig where someone turned, a dropped toy, or a faint scent line that dogs can follow. Those are the expected breadcrumbs of movement. In this case, none of those breadcrumbs appeared. No clothing, no tracks, no scent, no crumbs of any kind. The forest returned not a line of scattered signs but a total silence. That silence is what shifted Martell from doubt to a firm conclusion. Daniel Martell did not simply watch from a distance. He walked the land repeatedly, often with search teams and sometimes alone, flashlight and notebook in hand. He followed plausible child paths, old hunting routes, ATV tracks, forgotten footpaths, ridgelines that children might aim for, and clearings that might hold a dropped item. He compared impressions of disturbed earth to older marks nearby and checked areas where visibility drops quickly in deep brush. His local familiarity with terrain gave him a practical sense of where small signs normally appear and how quickly they remain visible. After multiple independent sweeps, his observations matched the professionals'. Nothing. More than one type of detection method failed to find any sign. Ground teams moved in tight grids, scanning every hill, ditch, and hollow. Aerial units used thermal imaging to detect heat signatures beneath the canopy. Drones performed systematic photographic sweeps. Canine teams, both trailing dogs and cadaver dogs, covered ravines, creek beds, and other scent-holding places. Water teams checked ponds and streams. The same sectors were often swept multiple times. Yet the repeated conclusion was identical. No confirmed clue connecting the children to the forested area. This repeated, multimodal absence is what shifts the argument from speculation to reasoned inference. If multiple independent detection approaches all return negative results in the same area, investigators must consider that the trail did not originate there. Martell's logic is straightforward. Trained professionals and repeated sweeps found nothing where evidence should exist if the children had entered the forest. Therefore, the probability that the children ever stepped into those trees decreases substantially. That change in probability does not prove a specific alternative, but it forces investigators to treat the forest as a less likely origin and to broaden the search in other directions. We should be explicit about what was not found. There were no children's items recovered, no shoes, socks, jackets, hats, toys, or small objects that young children commonly lose. There were no footprints or barefoot impressions in mud or soft earth. There were no scuff marks, no handprints, no broken branches or disturbed moss indicating hurried passage or a struggle. There was no scent trail dogs could lock onto and follow. That total absence of microevidence is not a minor detail. It contradicts what experienced wilderness search professionals expect to find in the first 24 hours when children actually wander into thick brush. Some will point to environmental factors as an explanation. Heavy rain, flash flooding, or rapid wildlife activity can obscure or remove traces in particular cases. But the searching teams anticipated these possibilities. They used canine units trained for varied conditions, they checked ravines and creek beds where scent can persist, and they reswept areas when conditions permitted. The breadth and redundancy of detection methods make it unlikely that weather alone explains the wholesale absence of all expected traces. The operational variety deployed, dogs, heat sensors, repeated human sweeps, drone imaging, is designed precisely to overcome environmental masking. When all these methods converge on nothing, that convergence itself becomes evidence. Importantly, the official response changed. The RCMP scaled back the massive ground search and signaled a shift in operational focus. A scaleback of resources is rarely casual. It typically follows an operational assessment that the area has been thoroughly examined and yielded no probative evidence. For Martell, that operational decision validated what he and search professionals had already observed in the field. Their actions suggested the woods were not the center of the mystery, they were the backdrop to it. That is why his public statement carried weight. It was not a lone voice but a synthesis of repeated professional outcomes and his own independent checks. When a search yields nothing, it does not solve the case. Absence of evidence is not proof of a specific alternative, but it is instructive. It narrows possibilities and reshapes investigative priorities. If the forest is effectively excluded, investigators must broaden their inquiry in practical ways, re-examine the immediate yard and property perimeter, look for vehicle movements, reassess access points, verify who had unmonitored access during the critical minutes and hours, and re-interview witnesses with a narrow focus on short, specific windows of time. Those actions are the most logical next steps when the assumed primary scene produces no trace. Within hours of Martell's statement, two kinds of responses should occur. First, investigators must treat the wood's silence as a redirection rather than a dead end. That means reallocating resources toward places where traces may have originated or been taken. Second, the public and media should avoid turning absence into a closed narrative of certainty. Martell's conclusion is compelling, but it remains an inference that prompts new lines of factual inquiry, not a final verdict on who or what occurred. The appropriate response is disciplined investigation, targeted, methodical, and evidence-driven. Consider the immediate follow-ups that matter. Forensic teams should conduct renewed, controlled sweeps of the property perimeter, focusing on entry and exit routes and any vehicles on or near the property during the critical period. Investigators should canvass for surveillance footage in a wider radius, doorbell cameras, dash cams, private security systems, and commercial cameras that may have incidental views. Witness re-interviews should zero in on minutes and even seconds, who saw what at particular times, who noticed a vehicle stopping briefly, and who can corroborate the movement of individuals or cars. Small discrepancies in recollections, once cross-checked, can yield the precise leads that physical trace did not provide. If the children did not walk into the woods, a stark possibility emerges. Their removal from the property left no natural trace. That could mean a person or vehicle removed them quickly before they had the chance to leave physical marks. That hypothesis demands urgent focus on vehicles and records of short-term stops, deliveries, rideshare entries, rental trucks, or any vehicle that made an unexplained stop. It also raises questions about who had routine or temporary access to the property and whether anyone in the immediate circle had both opportunity and motive to be present without the assumption of long-lasting presence. Another investigative vector is to revisit timelines with granular scrutiny. The absence of trace makes timing everything. When was the last confirmed sighting? Who had direct contact with the children in the minutes before they were last seen? Were there visitors, deliveries, or unfamiliar people in the area? Did any neighbor notice a short, unexplained vehicle stop? These are precisely the questions that escalate in importance when the physical trail offers nothing. Small, otherwise dismissible details, a transient vehicle, a door left open, a brief interaction, become critical pieces that can reconstruct movement in the absence of forest traces. Martell's own actions add weight to his words. He did not simply echo news reports. He walked the paths himself, compared ground impressions, and listened to search teams explain how they read terrain. His repeated, independent checks matched the professionals' conclusions. That convergence between a local's intimate terrain knowledge and the findings of trained search teams is rare and consequential. It transforms Martell's statement from a personal opinion into a reasoned inference that merits serious investigative reprioritization. The human side of this analysis cannot be ignored. Families and communities are desperate for resolution. Martell's conclusion is not an attempt to sensationalize but an urgent reframing. It tells family members and investigators alike that the initial hypothesis, children lost in the woods, must be reconsidered in favor of alternative scenarios that account for clinical absence of trace. That reframing should intensify search efforts in the most logical alternative locations, not reduce the urgency of the overall effort. The goal remains the same: locate the children and establish a full, verifiable timeline. Reporters and content creators covering this story should be responsible with language. Phrases like, "they were taken," or "they were removed," are plausible hypotheses but remain unproven. Reporting should emphasize that Martell's conclusion rests on a significant absence of expected evidence and that this absence requires investigators to pursue concrete, testable leads beyond the forest. Precision and restraint in reporting preserve the integrity of the investigation and help channel public attention toward verifiable, actionable assistance. Practical evidence leads that flow from this reframing include renewed forensic attention to the porch, the yard, and any vehicles on the property, checking for latent traces that initial chaotic searches may have missed, interviewing service providers like delivery drivers or utility workers who may have approached the property during critical windows, and carefully reviewing times of day when traffic patterns or weather might have helped obscure activity. Administrative logs, delivery receipts, contractor manifests, parking records often reveal movements that physical searches cannot. Digital forensics must also be prioritized. If physical trace is missing in the woods, digital footprints may fill gaps in the timeline. Phone location pings, metadata from smart devices, logs from local cameras, and social media timestamps can reveal movement patterns and presence. Investigators should work with service providers to obtain pertinent device and vehicle location records for the critical period. These data streams can identify short, otherwise invisible movements that physical searches could not detect, and they often produce the precise timestamps necessary to reconstruct a minute-by-minute timeline. Equally important is the question of motive and opportunity. If someone removed the children from the property, why would that person do so, and how did they do it without leaving clues? Was it an opportunistic act by a passerby, a planned removal by someone with knowledge of the property, or an action by someone known to the family? Each scenario suggests different physical traces and avenues of inquiry. Confirming or excluding these possibilities requires patient, thorough work, checking alibis, cross-referencing vehicle records, and re-evaluating relationships and access patterns. The operational tone in this stage must be methodical and patient. Investigators should avoid the trap of binary thinking, either the forest or foul play. Instead, treat Martell's observation as a pivot point for a multi-pronged approach. Intensified checks of the property and perimeter, deeper forensic analysis of vehicles and entry points, expanded canvassing for surveillance, focused re-interviews, and digital data pulls. Combined, these measures can recreate a timeline that compensates for the absence of a physical trail in the woods. Public appeals should be narrowly targeted and evidence-oriented. Ask for specific things: dashcam footage from a defined 2-hour window, recollections of particular vehicles or license plate fragments, notes about unusual delivery patterns, or memories of any brief interaction at the property. Vague tips flood an investigation. Precision, exact times, car descriptions, and small but verifiable details makes public assistance actionable when the forest offers no clues. Investigators should also consider whether the initial search's intensity might have inadvertently disturbed fragile traces near the property perimeter. Large volunteer sweeps and the influx of vehicles and equipment can alter or obscure evidence. If so, a thorough, controlled forensic sweep focused on the yard and immediate approaches, using contamination control protocols and fresh collection techniques, could reveal subtle signs that were missed in the initial emergency response. Controlled re-examination under forensic standards often uncovers items or impressions overlooked amid early, necessary chaos. Throughout this reframing, caution remains essential. Martell's claim narrows possibilities but does not point definitively to a perpetrator or a precise sequence. It does, however, sharpen the investigative lens. Rather than continue to invest primary resources in exhaustive researching of the same sweeps that yielded nothing, investigators should invest those resources into other areas where the odds of finding trace are now higher: vehicles, access points, surveillance footprints, and digital trails. That reallocation increases the chance of finding the small, verifiable leads that physical wilderness searches failed to produce. Community response should be constructive. Neighbors can help by checking old recordings, recounting precise movements, and preserving any potential physical evidence such as mud on shoes or recent vehicle tracks until investigators can collect them. Local businesses and delivery services should check logs for recent stops and validate routes. Every small, corroborated fact helps reconstruct the minutes that matter when the forest offers no story to follow. As for the family, the focus must remain on supporting their needs while assisting the investigation. Martell's observation may feel like a sliver of clarity in the fog, but it also brings new, painful possibilities. Investigators, journalists, and the community have an obligation to pursue every lead with rigor while shielding the family from rumor and speculation that can cause further harm. Compassionate handling of information and privacy protects both the family and the integrity of the inquiry. At the same time, it is prudent to keep an open mind about less likely explanations. Rare scenarios exist where traces are obscured in unusual ways or where children move quickly into a microenvironment where scent and tracks fail to register. Investigators should not abandon any reasonable line of inquiry simply because Martell's inference is persuasive. Instead, they should stack evidence, unify the negative findings in the woods with positive searches for trace elsewhere until a coherent, corroborated narrative emerges that can be tested. Martell's statement has immediate value because it reframes where investigators must look and how the public should assist. The wood's silence is not a conclusion in itself. It's a signal that another path may be more productive. That signal should trigger specific actions: renewed forensic sweeps of the perimeter and vehicles, expanded digital data requests, precise public appeals for dashcam or doorbell footage, and methodical re-interviews focusing on the narrow minutes surrounding the last confirmed sighting. Those steps maximize the chance of turning absence in one domain into positive evidence in another. Investigators should also consider pattern analysis. Look for repeated behaviors or routes used by local traffic that could provide context for an opportunistic removal. Map recent deliveries, short-term visitors, landscaping or maintenance workers, and anyone with a reason to be near the property around the critical window. Cross-reference those with vehicle registration and location data. Even a short stop by an unfamiliar vehicle or a single doorbell activation could be the missing stitch that binds together otherwise disconnected recollections. Equally critical is preserving the chain of custody for any material leads. If a neighbor turns over a dashcam clip, that file must be logged, preserved, and analyzed promptly. Investigators should use image enhancement tools to extract timestamps and license plate details when possible while ensuring forensic integrity. For physical evidence like mud on shoes or a fabric fragment, controlled collection protocols can preserve information that routine early searches might have compromised. Every small scrap of reliably collected evidence can be the difference between a cold lead and a breakthrough. Collaborations with local businesses and municipal entities can yield unexpected data. Garbage pickup routes, municipal maintenance logs, and local contractors' job sheets can reveal who was in the area. A rental truck recorded on a contractor's manifest, a short-term moving van in the street, or a landscaper's invoice with a timestamp can all be cross-checked. When physical trace fails, administrative records often fill gaps that would otherwise remain empty. Finally, the emotional toll on families and communities must guide how information is solicited and shared. Appeals should be compassionate but precise, emphasizing verification and privacy. Investigators should provide clear channels for submitting evidence, protect the confidentiality of callers when warranted, and publicly communicate the specific kinds of information they need. This helps prevent the spread of rumor and focuses community energy on producing what is actually useful to the case. In short, Daniel Martell's statement reframes the story from a search in the woods to a search of timelines, access, and movement. It converts an absence into a roadmap, one that points toward vehicles, perimeters, cameras, and small human acts that often leave trace where nature did not. The work ahead is painstaking and slow, but it is focused. And when the forest gives nothing, that precision becomes the most powerful tool investigators have left. Stay alert, preserve specifics, and let method guide the search. The wood's silence is not the end, it is the signal that the answer lies elsewhere, and with focused, patient work, those missing pieces can still be found.